Very nice to meet you, very nice to be here. This is perfect timing following the last panel, which is all around big picture. How do we do behavior change, connect it to values? What we're gonna do now is bring that even closer to reality, closer to the ground, with some systematic tools and techniques and principles that you can use based on the science and the evidence. So you can start making these changes right away in the very next email that you write. It's important to look at the science because human behavior is a lot more complex than we maybe think of it as at first glance. We're getting towards the end of the year, we're getting towards New Year's resolution times. Who here has made a New Year's resolution that they maybe fell off with by February? Yeah, right? But when you made that resolution, you really meant it. You were motivated, you were excited, there was no doubt in your mind that this was something that was important to you, but then life got in the way. Right? And that becomes what we call the last mile problem, where the motivation and the intention are there, but the action doesn't necessarily happen. And so this actually has a name in the behavioral science space called the intention-action gap, or the say-do gap, you might have heard it called. And this is where we need to start to look to really fine-tune the results of any initiatives that you might be trying to complete in your organizations. Because you might get people motivated, you might get people aware, but if you're not helping them actually do the behavior, your KPI goals will not be met. So for those of you who aren't familiar with behavioral science, we'll back up with a quick definition. Behavioral science is an umbrella term that covers a lot of different academic fields that help us understand why people do what they do and then effectively influence their behavior. So this includes everything from social psychology, organizational psychology, neuroscience, behavioral economics. All of these fields come together under this umbrella in the applied real-world space. And so those are some of the tools and techniques we're gonna be learning together today. This is really important because our default intuition, when we're trying to figure out other people and why they're doing what they're doing and how to change that, is very Spock-like, meaning rational and conscious. We think if we give people the information, they're gonna take it in, they're gonna analyze it consciously, rationally, they're then gonna make a choice that aligns with that analysis, and then they're gonna do a behavior that aligns with that choice, that aligns with that analysis. But we've already talked about our New Year's resolutions. This doesn't actually happen in real life. It's just what we think happens because it's what we're aware of our brains doing. But in fact, the science shows that we're a lot more like Homer Simpson than we are like Spock. There's a lot going on underneath the surface, subconsciously, that we're not aware of. So specifically, we're like Homer Simpson in 4 ways. First way is that we're biased. And in this context, when I'm talking about biases, I'm talking about cognitive biases or heuristics, which are unconscious mental shortcuts we all have baked into our brains that help us navigate the world a lot more efficiently because it puts a lot of things on autopilot, but it can lead us astray sometimes. The second way that we actually make decisions is that we are very contextual, meaning the way that we present information to people changes the decisions that they make, which shouldn't matter if we're rational calculating machines. For example, if I tell you something is 99% fat-free, or if I tell you something is 1% fat, mathematically that's obviously the same thing, but you perceive those things a little bit differently because I'm drawing your attention to different things with the way I've presented that choice. Contextual also applies to the mood that you're in, the people that you're with, what you're wearing. All of these things influence the way that we decide and behave. We're very emotional. We've talked about that a little bit today, but it's really important to reinforce that this is actually fundamental. This is not extra credit. There's science that shows that in people whose brains have been damaged, the emotional part, due to injury or illness, actually cannot make decisions. They can't decide in the morning, should I wear the white shirt or the blue shirt? Because you can't calculate that, right? You need some kind of emotion to differentiate and also to motivate. It gives you that oomph to get going and move on to the next thing. And finally, we're very social. So we really care what other people think of us, and we care to be like the people that we identify with. We like to follow the crowds that we like. So when I tell people all of this, they get a little bit frustrated sometimes because it sounds messy. How do I work with this if it's not rational, if it's subconscious, if it's emotional? What do I do with this? Luckily, that's where that behavioral science umbrella comes back in with those many, many fields with decades of research, some of which have been summed up in some of these great books, and some of which has won Nobel Prizes. This is cutting-edge, top-tier science that we're talking about that we're going to boil down to be very actionable for you today. And this is really exciting because it gives you a new tool to influence yourselves, the people in your life, and the people in your organization. Because often when we think about getting people to do something, we think, okay, well, we'll make some rules. We tell them what they can and can't do. And that only gets you so far. People love to think about incentives when they think about behavior change. But there are actually scientists who spend their entire careers studying incentives because it's so hard to get it right, and there are so few contexts in which it's really the appropriate tool to use. So that's usually the last place I will go, not the first. And finally, we all love information. We love educating. We love making people aware. We figure if they know it, they will do it. But we all know that's not true, right? If we really think about it. So this behavioral science knowledge opens up an entirely new toolkit for us, one of which is called nudging. So nudging is all about looking at the moment of decision and saying, how can I shape the context of this moment to make the desired behavior the easiest behavior? How can I remove friction between current and desired state? So the example you can see here is a situation where we're trying to help people be healthier. And the option is take the stairs or take the escalator. Escalator is obviously easier in most cases. How do we encourage the healthier physical activity for those who are able? You could give people rules about who can and cannot use which mode of transportation. You could try to pay people to take the stairs, which might be exciting the first time, but at the end of the day, you're probably going to turn it down if you're tired. And you could educate people on how much healthier it is to take the stairs and give them that information. But all of that is expensive. It's a lot of work, takes a lot of time on your part, and it doesn't have the results that are really that good for that level of input. So nudging is all about saying, okay, let's make this the easier, the more appealing option. So this was a one-time intervention, very cheap, some black and white paint. You make the stairs fun. You make them look like piano keys, and suddenly everybody wants to take the stairs. You didn't say a word to anyone. You don't have to come back and maintain this. It's a simple tweak of that moment of choice that gets you the desired outcome. So this is the way that we're going to try to approach looking at your HR initiatives and how to make them stick. If you're interested, there's an entire book on this called Nudge Management, but to boil it down to the key point, it's really not about changing minds. We think we need to convince people, but really it's much easier and more effective to change the context in which we want them to behave. So let's talk about how that can look for you. And I'm going to do that through telling you a story of a very, very simple project we did with a client earlier this year that was trying to help them get a higher participation rate in their annual employee reviews. This was a very large household name global company working with their global head of HR, and they had recently switched from being optional completion of these reviews to mandatory. And they came to us about 3 weeks before the close of this review window and said, our participation rate is low. It's 42%. Our goal was 80. And we've tried a bunch of stuff. It is not moving us at the pace we need to move with this impending deadline. What can we do in the time that we have left? I'll show you some of the small tweaks that we made using these behavioral science principles that got them from that 42% completion rate up to 71 in just 2 weeks of implementation. And no tech, no big rollout, nothing really complicated, just being thoughtful about how we approach it. So these are the 4 key pillars I'd like you to remember walking out of this talk today, because you can apply these to the very next email that you write or the very next program that you start to brainstorm. First one is designing for simplicity. So one of the books I showed earlier by the Nobel Prize winners, it's called Nudge. And the way the authors summarize that book, the entire book, all of their Nobel Prize winning science, is make it easy. That's the key takeaway. But really, if you look at this, a very simple example in our world is looking at studies that show that in a benefits enrollment process, if you simply remove one step, completion rate jumps by 20%. Pretty amazing. Communicating with meaning is about connecting back to that emotional part of ourselves, helping people connect personally and emotionally. There was a study that was done by Yale University with custodians in hospitals, and they reframed their job from cleaning rooms to helping patients heal. And that simple reframe, connecting them emotionally to the purpose, led to a 25% increase in job satisfaction and performance. No extra training, no big comms campaign. Harnessing social proof. Again, we are social animals. We care what other people think of us and what people like us are doing. Employees who know that their peers are completing educational learning courses provided by the company are 57% more likely to complete them. So just tell them, your peers are doing this, immediately you're going to see a huge jump. And making it timely. So this is all about giving people the information that they need when they need it, not a week or 2 weeks before that they need to go back and find the email and remember and da-da-da, right? In the moment is really important. We've seen in studies with managers who are completing their own self-assessment, when you give them a reminder to complete the assessments of their direct reports, 26% higher completion rate. So none of this is really elaborate, none of this is super high tech. It's about going back to basics on a deep understanding of human psychology and being really intentional about applying these simple principles in a deliberate and systematic way. And that's where you're going to get the real power of these tools. So let me show you this really simple example played out across these 4 principles. Going back to this client with their 2-week deadline for this annual review process. They had some emails they had already drafted, and so they said, here's what we're working with, whatever you can recommend is helpful, and anything outside of these emails as well is welcome. So we started with that design for simplicity, or make it easy. And I think the first thing that jumps out at you is a big red button in the middle at the top of this email, right? That's on purpose. We want the call to action, or the desired behavior of this communication, to be in your face. Super obvious, can't miss it, don't have to think about it. Previously, they had had the button down at the bottom of the email. You had to scroll to get to it. There were 2 buttons, so you had to make a choice, which call to action am I gonna follow right now, which is a moment of friction, having to decide, and they were kind of small and dark and subtle. So he said, 1 call to action, front and center, nice and bright, so people don't have to engage too much to follow through on this desired behavior. In the same vein, we made sure that the action steps that were explained a little bit after that button in this email were very simple. They had tried to explain in paragraphs what the whole employee review process was going to be, and it was just too much in one place. So we said, give them 2 bullet points, make it really clear, make it very action-oriented. Outside of this email, we looked at the broader ecosystem of this desired behavior. Obviously, they go from the email, they need to go to the platform to actually complete their reviews. So in this platform, we also made some recommendations for how to do things like remove steps, just like that benefits enrollment example. Fewer clicks, fewer scrolls, very clear instructions to make it as easy as possible. I joke one of the big keys to all of this being successful is making people use as few brain cells as you can. That's where you're going to get some success. Our second principle was communicating with meaning, connecting with emotion and purpose. In this case, we started with the subject line. This is something that's very easy to forget, but it's actually so critical because it's what gets people to open the rest of the email that you worked really hard and you want them to read. So in this case, we made sure the subject line had the incentive in the sense of what's in it for me, not a literal incentive, and a deadline to give some urgency and some emotional connection with this, as opposed to this is just kind of a PSA I can deal with when I want to deal with it, right? We use personalization, of course, by making sure that their name was in there, pretty straightforward, but also personalization as it related to their journey. So if you are someone who has not completed this at all and never opened the platform, versus if you've opened it and you've started but you haven't finished, versus you've totally finished, you should be getting different emails, or in the case of the last group, no more emails. You've done the job. We also, really importantly, reframed the call to action and the message to focus more on what's in it for me for the target audience. Previously, the way it had been phrased was very top-down. This is a leadership initiative, it's a company requirement. That should be enough to make people want to do it, right? Wrong, right? People are busy. So we say, what's in it for them? This is all about acknowledging your accomplishments. You work hard, you deserve to have that acknowledged. This is about your career growth. That's exciting, that's inherently motivating for people. This is about contributing to our shared culture of excellence. That's something that we work here for that reason. Let's lean into it. So that simple reframe to put yourself in the shoes of your audience is also very important for that meaning. We're social creatures, so we want to harness that social proof where we can. Very simply, being thoughtful about the messenger, the email address that it actually came from, and also the sign-off at the end of the email. We're meant to now be the manager or some well-known leader to that team, as opposed to like the HR benefits system, right? We don't want it to be faceless and nameless, we want it to be personal. We also said for future emails in this cadence, you should start to get information about the number of their peers who had completed their reviews. So you can say, this many people have already completed it. The implication is get on board, right? And finally, making it timely. So we created a obviously short, but very intentional cadence for the emails that should go out throughout this period leading up to the deadline. So that included, at the beginning, some of the emails you saw about just, you need to get this done, here's the deadline. Next, bringing in more of that social proof as you build up that momentum of people completing it. Then getting really into the urgency of the deadline is approaching to make sure that we are following the emotional path we need them to follow to get this desired behavior completed. We also reminded them to be intentional about the time of day, the day of week, and even holidays, because again, this is global. All different countries have different time zones, different holiday schedules. Not sending things at 3 in the morning on a holiday in China, right? Not useful. So sending that information when people are receptive to it so that they can act on it quickly and easily. So when it comes to how do we make our HR initiative stick? There's been a lot of really wonderful, really big picture conversations today that are so important. There's a lot of really amazing, very expensive and complicated tools that are available in the technology space now to help us. But at the end of the day, remembering the human elements will always work without a huge amount of extra effort. They'll help you work smarter, not harder, using especially these 4 principles on both a tactical level, but at a strategic level as well. Really asking yourself, have I made it easy? Have I designed for simplicity? Have I communicated with meaning and emotion in a personal way? Have I made sure that this is something social, it's collective, there's a meaningful messenger? And have I sent this information in a time and place that's going to make sense for this person to follow through? Remembering that we're not trying to change people's minds, because even if their mind is changed, that's not enough. We remember that intention to action gap. It's really about changing the context to make the desired behavior the easier behavior. And bringing all of this science together is how you're going to make sure that you are driving that positive change in your organizations, both short and long term. Thank you very much.